Hey guys, this is Nick with Cymatics, and in this video we're going to be continuing our beat making process and wrapping it up essentially. We're going to be doing the mix. I'm going to show you guys some general outlines of what you should be looking for when you mix down the beat, and covering some master bus processing techniques as well. So let's just play through what we have right now. So you might notice that on the master bus we're clipping because I've brought the kick up to a level which I find appropriate. So generally for the kick, we want the kick to be the loudest part of the mix. This is kind of where it started, but I want it to be louder. I want to really push it. And that will inevitably cause you to redline at some point. And we're going to talk about how to fix that in a second. But that should be happening if your kick and 808 are in phase. So if your kick and 808 are phase aligned, then the kick plus 808 combination will be louder, as we've discussed in the 808 video, in the kick selection video. They'll be louder because they boost each other. Now, if you want to clean up that relationship, one thing I usually do is if I'm having problems, I would boost the area of the kick with an EQ that has that thuddy element, which affects your chest area when you play it through speakers. I don't want to really concern myself with the subs because the subs are dominated by the 808. That's its job. However, this part, roughly about 120 hertz or so, that is going to be what I'm looking for in my kick. That part. So I can boost that. It'll be 2 dB or so, and cut that much away from the 808. About 124 hertz as well. And, you know, it depends how much you reduce it by. I mean, a good rule of thumb is to reduce it by the same amount as you boost it in the kick, but, you know, it's really up to the situation. But that will help clean up and, like, make room for the kick to punch through in that key area where the 808 doesn't play much role. Like, the role the 808 plays is down here in the subs. You should be wary of the fact that any large changes in the EQ of the low end of the kick will affect its phase. Always kind of check back to see with your phase inversion if all of a sudden your phase is reversed by doing any big changes. So if we just check here, if we reverse the polarity back to normal, it's completely gone. There's no kick there, which means that we're still okay because we can just turn it back. It's harder to deal with when the 808 and the kick are their phase aligned but halfway, because then you're getting some interference there which isn't hard to pinpoint. But here it's very easy. You just invert it, kick is gone. So I like my snares, my rim shots, whatever, to be loud as well in the mix. Basically the way you should be looking at it is you want your kick to be the loudest because it's going to be what rocks the club floors or whatever if your song's being played on big speakers. But the rim shot or the clap or the snare should be competing with it, because if the rim is too quiet, the entire beat falls apart. Like, listen. That makes no sense. You want the rim to be just loud enough where it competes. And we're getting some distortion still. I'm going to deal with that later. Hope it's not bothering you, but, you know, it's not that bad. It's just hard clipping, digital clipping. Hi-hats, they play a pretty marginal role in the mix for me. If there's a huge amount of sub happening, that needs to go, obviously. If you're dealing with claps and not rims, I generally deal with the high end a lot more. I give it a bit more of a boost. So for instance here, I would have an EQ just to give me a tiny bit of air in the high end. It works here too. Just a really tiny bit of shine at around the 12K, 13K range, and maybe a bit of a boost in the body of the rim, but not too much because it's already good. I don't need to do much to it. EQ just helps it compete. You know, if it's already competitive with the kick and they're at equal levels, there's nothing, you don't need to worry about it. A big part of the problem comes from the sample, the loop. I always have to cut the low mids away with a low shelf. At about 150 hertz, 5, 6 dB, maybe 10, situation changes, because this is exactly the area where you get conflict between the kick and the 808. And if you use a high pass filter, you're going to kill the sound. Thankfully here we don't have much going on in the low mids to begin with. But this will neuter the sound too much, because we still want those frequencies. So we use a shelf to be a bit more gradual, okay? And that gives the 808 and the kick room to breathe, and in turn it'll give you more headroom in the end. I'm also looking for levels. I want to make sure that my second hi-hat isn't jutting out. Typically when I'm mixing, I'm also looking for reverbs and delays. Reverbs and delays give you space. So for instance, this cymbal, I like it dry, but you can also conceive putting a delay on it that'll just shuttle it back and forth in a ping pong mode, like so. Or on whole notes, like that. I like because that also adds to the groove. So if we listen, it gives it a spacier vibe. Versus, then you're left waiting, but this fills in that space very adequately. For instance, this tom, also, I'm looking to make sure that it's not occupying too much low end. So I'm going to throw in an EQ. You can see all this stuff happening. This sub, even though nothing's playing at that same time in that register, I still want to deal with it. I want to make sure it's not jutting in between the kicks and 808s in a way where it's starting to dominate. Because I want the kicks and 808s to be the loudest in the low end. So this is a tonal change. It's a percussion element. It's not meant to be a kind of a mainstay in our drum track. So if we turn it off, it's very boomy. And finally, when it comes to the master bus, you might find that if you use a limiter, that you lose a lot of the impact of the kick and the 808 together. So if you play this, you can see that, you can hear that there's no distortion, but it's sucking out a lot of energy. It's just basically doing compression. And it's very clean, but it doesn't sound good because it sucks out all the power. So what we need to do is use some soft clipping to really try and maximize that power and get some distortion that's usually pleasant. It really depends on the soft clipper. I'm going to reduce the range of my compression to 0. I don't want to do any compression. But if we just play this, we're not going to be peaking. So if you watch my master fader, so my kick is still banging, still coming through. Versus this, where we're starting to get some distortion, and we're peaking like 6 dB over 0. And typically I put a limiter, a true peak limiter after this. Let me put this up to 0. Why? Because the clipping process creates what are called intersample peaks. It's just a complicated term for distortion, which the computer doesn't recognize. It only happens when you play it out of speakers. So this limiter by Pro L2, there's other true peak limiters. They deal with that distortion so that you can play it through speakers and you're not going to get distortion where you didn't, intend it to be there. So we can even try a bit of a boost here to see if we can get any more loudness. I use the dynamic mode for that. Different clippers, different limiters will allow you to do different things, and they also allow you to work better with different kinds of program material or different kinds of beats and sounds. So some limiters deal very well with certain sounds, others don't. But this way we can have a very loud kick that has distortion on it, but it's pleasant. It's not like clipping, like hard clip digital distortion. And this is achieved through soft clipping. We disabled it again. We're running straight into the limiter. It has its own sound, but if we push it, it starts to have this really obnoxious high-end distortion. Whereas with a soft clipper, you can kind of push it into pretty extreme values depending on the clipper again. So if you start to get this blown out kick sound. And where you stop, it's really up to your taste and up to the limits of the software you're using. You should probably be using a soft clipper which has oversampling built in. Ableton doesn't, but... it's really a bad habit to get into, but sometimes I mix into the clipper. Really, all my loudness is being generated from the mix tracks. Like I can take my kick, and when the clipper on the master is enabled, I can just shove the kick as deep as I want. And it's not ever going to go over 0, but I can find that sweet spot. That's a point where it's not distorting too much and it's loud. It's at a good level relative to everything else in the mix. So this is it can be a time-consuming process, but if you mix everything properly in the mix, in terms of not having too much sub and different instruments and so on, you'll have a much easier time. You'll be able to crank the volume pretty hard into the clipper, and it'll just give up at some point. The way you mix your song in terms of taking care of the frequencies, that will increase the level at which your clipper will give up. So you can eke out more loudness out of a good mix. Out of a bad mix, you'll be able to eke out very little loudness because the clipper will start to not be able to handle all those phase and frequency masking and all this crap that's left in, and it'll just give up and start distorting. The primary thing in the mixing of a hip-hop beat is to make sure your kick and 808 are in phase. Everything else is secondary. If you figure that out, if you manage to get very nice phase-locked samples, then you can really push the entire mix into a clipper. It's, again, any kind of orthodox engineer would be shuddering in horror, but that's kind of the sound of modern hip-hop. So don't be afraid to do it, because it's not... Soft clipping is completely legitimate. It has its own sound, and it has a very useful feature, which is that it creates huge amounts of loudness, and the distortion it creates is actually pleasant in the genre of hip-hop. So yeah, I hope you guys learned something. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.